What is Suno up to with the latest changes in their legalese? There's some weird stuff afoot, stay tuned. I've spent a lot of time on this channel talking about generative AI and how it intersects with music creators through services like Suno and Udio. AI music generation is obviously a very hot topic right now. I was recently in Washington, D.C. talking to legislators about it, and I had a really illuminating conversation with one legislator in particular. This was Becca Balint from Vermont, and she kind of cornered me and she said, forget all the legalese stuff, just tell me the boots on the ground, how does this affect you? What's going on? And so I gave her my ultra short 30-second answer to the question, which is basically this. These AI music generation engines have vacuumed up millions of pieces of copyrighted content and now algorithmically deconstruct it and reconstruct it according to the prompts of a user to make new pieces of music that are based on my stuff and can do so infinitely without my consent, without any credit, and without any compensation. And that's a problem. And I could tell as I gave her that answer, something clicked, like it suddenly became very real. And that's why intellectual property theft is really at the root of this discussion. But regardless of those battles, which we hope will be resolved with responsible legislation, and many of which will be fought out in the courts over time, generative AI engines like Suno and Udio are being used more and more by entry levels, by mid levels, and even by professionals at this point. I've personally witnessed professionals using it to experiment with styles, to generate more ideas. I've seen songwriters feed their fully fledged and written demos into these engines to produce instantly produced versions of tracks. Others are starting with basic ideas, feeding them into the engine, and then using the tools to expand on those ideas. And still others are just playing games with them and using them as a toy to generate weird and funky and maybe humorous songs on topics that no one would seriously write songs about. But with the advent of these engines, you can pretty much make them write a song about anything. And then we have a small sliver of people, I would say the hacker community, who are using these tools to automate the large-scale creation of music and are hoping to claim some royalties and/or notoriety from doing it. We've already seen the first of AI pop stars hit the top of the charts with AI-generated songs, which of course hits the headlines and provokes widespread debate on whether this is really where we want to go as a culture. And really, it's hard to predict where any of this is going to end up. It's a very interesting time in the creative community, for sure. So in this video, I want to hit pause temporarily on the legal and the ethical questions about how these engines work. Those topics have been covered in other videos. I remain very concerned about it, and it's the subject of constant discussions in DC as well as negotiations behind the scenes. But in this video, I want to focus on a separate question. If you use these engines, who legally owns the results of what it comes up with? I think it's really important to understand the ownership of the intellectual property. In the past month, Suno has made some really interesting changes in its language. And with a little bit of help from the Wayback Machine, I'm going to show you some stuff that might get you thinking differently about this. First, take a look at this page, which is called Do I Have the Copyrights to Songs I Made? This is a version of the page that was captured on November 12th, 2025. It reads in part, relating to Suno, if you make music with the basic, free plan, Suno is the owner of the songs. You are allowed to use the songs for non-commercial purposes. If you make songs while subscribed to the Pro or Premier plan, you own the songs. Further, you are granted a commercial use license to monetize those songs. In both cases, however, the material may not be eligible for copyright protection. Pay attention to that word may. You don't want to hear the word may when it comes to legalese. In the US, copyright laws protect material created by a human. Music made 100% with AI would not qualify for copyright protection because a human did not write the lyrics or the music. So you can already see there's some ambiguity here. If you're a paid customer, you can own the songs, but you may not be able to copyright them. And that's where Suno leaves you. It's not going to give you any more detailed advice than this. They're basically saying, you're on your own. But now take a look at the new version of the same page. The language has changed. Relating to Suno, you may be granted commercial use rights which allow you to reproduce, copy the songs to sell, distribute, etc. Even with granted commercial use rights, you generally are not considered the owner of the songs since the output was generated by Suno. So now you may be granted commercial use rights, but you're not the owner. And again, you may not be eligible for copyright protection, which when I read that, I basically think, don't count on any copyright protection at all. There's also another relevant page in their help section called Does Suno own the music I make? Here's the version from November 2025. If you were subscribed with a Pro or Premier plan when the song was created, you are considered the owner of the song. You also retain the rights to commercial use for the song, even if you end your subscription. But here's the new version of the same page. If you were subscribed with a Pro or Premier plan when the song was created, you are granted commercial rights use for the song. You also retain the commercial use rights after ending your subscription. This does not indicate ownership, however, as we can't guarantee that what you input was yours, and we can't guarantee that the output won't be similar to other outputs we create. I think there's a minefield of information in that last sentence right there. First of all, this should be common sense. Whatever prompts you put into the engine, it is theoretically possible that someone else puts the exact same prompts in there. And then what the algorithm does with that prompt, Suno can't guarantee that it won't resemble something else that it's done with that prompt. Which makes sense because the algorithm at its heart is reducing the source material to its basic components and now reassembling it into a new formation. So while it's entirely possible that they've added layers of randomization, and I would expect that they probably have, the shards of data that it is reassembling could very well resemble other things it's made, or could very well resemble the source material that powers the engine. We refer to that as the training data. What did this engine listen to and study in order to know the components of music? So, to recap, prior to November 2025, they claimed you could own the results if you're on one of their paid tiers. But post November 2025, they've changed their tune, no pun intended. Now you don't own the results, although you can claim commercial use rights. Which, if you're following along, leads us to a new place of confusion, because it seems like they're saying you have commercial use rights to distribute, i.e. sell, monetize, receive royalties from, but they're saying you can do that with something you don't own. Now, if that wasn't confusing enough, I want to turn to the terms and conditions, which are technically the legalese that you agree to if you are using their site. So the terms and conditions are legally binding, whereas everything I read up to this point is not fully legally binding because it's just a blog post on their site. Their terms and conditions say this. If you are a user who has subscribed to the Pro or Premier paid tier of the service, Suno hereby assigns to you its right, title, and interest in and to any output owned by Suno and generated from submissions made by you through the service during the term of your paid tier subscription. So now they're giving you right and title and interest. However, due to the nature of machine learning, Suno makes no representation or warranty that any copyright will vest in any output. So you've got right, title, and interest, but you have no assurance of copyright protection. So if you're getting the impression this whole thing might be a little bit of a house built out of straw, so I see enough ambiguity between those terms of service compared to their blog posts on the topic, and one would assume that their attorneys will be cleaning that up pretty soon. But I do want to point out that this sloppiness is a bit of a byproduct of the nature of the underlying technology. We have an engine here that's built on, trained on millions of pieces of copyrighted material while claiming to the public that everything they're doing is completely legal. And of course, that leads us to some very weird and gray areas, both legally and ethically. And not just legal and ethical, I think we have problems from a creative perspective too. When you're using these engines, you really have no idea where the source material is coming from because they've purposefully obfuscated the sources. And in my opinion, that should be disturbing to anyone who takes pride in creating original material. Now, there have been some legal developments over the past few months that have affected both Suno and Udio. Both of them have predictably been sued by major music companies over exactly the gray areas that I've just mentioned. Udio reached a settlement with Universal Music Group in October 2025. This settlement was a pretty dramatic one in that UMG successfully forced Udio to redesign its platform, to shut down some of its more egregious features that allowed for large-scale copyright infringement, and then create a new walled garden environment which offers greater control for UMG. It's a notable agreement, but the devil is in the details. I'm not going to go too deep into it in this video because the ink's still wet on it and we don't know exactly what it's going to look like when it's ready. So it could mean all kinds of things and I don't want to guess at where it's going to end up. Now, somewhat similarly, Suno reached a settlement with Warner Music Group in November 2025. Both the Suno and Udio lawsuits are efforts to create a partnership where both sides can retain ownership of the property. Suno and Udio want to control their technology, and Warner wants to control their IP, and then move forward amicably. Suno's settlement is definitely more murky than the Udio settlement, and again, the devil's in the details. Let's not predict where things are going to end up because it's just too murky at the moment. But I did want to mention both of these settlements because it's really indicative, it's informative about how fast This battle is progressing, and there are daily and weekly developments that affect the course of it. And a lot of it really is messy. As a music creator, as a film composer, as a songwriter, as a producer, I'm a huge benefactor of the march of technology that enables me to work faster and smoother and capture those moments of inspiration. But I also have a massive problem when intellectual property, probably my intellectual property, is being used against me. There's been a lot in the news over the past month or two about large-scale fraud going on in our government. Taxpayers are raising serious concerns over what are basically money laundering schemes. And I think this situation with generative AI is analogous to that. The creative work of uncountable numbers of composers and songwriters like me has been taken and is now being used by these services to power their algorithm. And that's why there's a big problem here. It's not the technology itself. The technology is amazing. It's the training data. It's all the raw food that's being fed into it, which is now making millions of pieces of prompt-generated music. Now, when I grew up, there was a finite amount of music and media that we could realistically consume. We had to physically go to a record store or camp out by the radio with our cassette players trying to capture the songs that we loved, or go to the movies to watch the latest films because there was no such thing as streaming on demand. Once streaming came along, it offered us near unlimited content for a low subscription price, basically a rental fee. And the result in many cases is that this can cheapen the art. It turns it into fast food, something that's good enough for us to get by when we're hungry for entertainment, but not something that we place serious value on. Because now the vast quantity of media has become so saturated that we can take it for granted. That's why I posted this message last month. Streaming has turned music and movies into fast food. Now, generative AI breaks it down with algorithmic enzymes and regurgitates it. We're not on a good path. That's where we are right now with the explosion of unregulated generative AI. If our DSPs like Spotify aren't careful, they might soon be saturated with more AI content than real content, and I don't think that leads us to a good place. And all this is not in any way to say that AI is a big problem. There are incredibly potent areas in which AI has or will make incredible scientific breakthroughs, and analyze data to solve real human problems, or solve crimes by connecting the dots and evidence that humans could never realistically do directly. I have no problem with any of that as long as it's done with proper privacy guardrails in place. But that's a completely different sector than what's happening right now with generative AI in the music, video, and art spaces. So what's the takeaway? My advice is to be very careful about the tools that you use. Big shocker, not everything out there on this information superhighway is good or ethical or even legal. And as I covered in a previous video, sometimes there are tools that could be used ethically or unethically right there in the same interface. Please leave me your thoughts below. This is a very complicated topic, obviously, but I'd love to hear your reaction to it, even if you're just reacting to one individual point within the video. In fact, I'll leave some bullet points and chapter markings in the description below, so you can zero in on exactly what you want to respond to. In this new year, I hope to have a lot more conversations about things like this, and maybe respond to your comments, maybe go live. We'll see how it goes. Meanwhile, stay creative, and I mean really creative. Go make some new stuff. And make it yourself, and be proud of it. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment below. I really appreciate you watching. I'll see you on the next one.